Welcome to another edition of the Power Lunch Podcast. I'm your host, Frederick Douglass Bussey. We're back with a great episode. It's going to be an abbreviated episode, but I think it's going to be powerful and power packed, jam packed with power. How about that? As always, we're always talking to entrepreneurs and people who are empowering others to live their best life. And today we're going to be talking with someone who's making a transition in a powerful way. And I think that what he's up to is something that's really going to be impactful. We're going to talk about what he's got coming up here very, very soon. And we're going to encourage a lot of you, especially the men entrepreneurs and men leaders, to join in this event as well. That being said, Power Lunch starts right now. Welcome back to Power Lunch. Today's guest is a good friend of mine. He is someone I actually went to college with, knew from before college. We actually even worked at summer camp together as camp counselors, amazingly. So, but he's an incredible leader, incredible individual. He's up to something really powerful in building a movement that really speaks to individuals who want to be better leaders, better men, better, more impactful in their communities in every possible way. And he's got something that he's really cooking up. I'm actually going to be a speaker in this event that he has coming up here soon. But without further delay, I want to bring him in. Our guest for today is none other than Dr. MyRon Edmonds. How are you, brother?
I'm good, man. You brought up college and you brought up summer camp. And I want y'all to know, man, Fred looks younger now than he did when we were in college. This man's got full head of hair. I have no hair. I was trying to find a proper cap to cover up the spots where I haven't shaved. Dude, what are you doing? That's what we want to know, man. What are you doing to stay so young? Tried to get me to play basketball with you when I was in Atlanta that time. I'm like, dude, you're not retired? Man, it's good to be with you, though, bro.
Hey, man, I'm glad to have you on. Been a long time coming. So give people a little bit of context. Well, actually, let me do this. Tell people a little bit about what you are, because you're kind of on the cusp of something, right? You have a career that you had for several decades, but you're also building this other thing that is really taking off, that is really having cultural impact as well. So I want you to kind of, those who don't know you, tell people a little bit about who you are, what you're up to.
Absolutely. And it's funny. I really get asked that question because people either deal with me in compartments. I'm pastor, which I've been doing for it's almost 25 years now. I love pastoring because I love people. I love leadership. And if you love those things, and if you love people, pastoring is definitely for you. I'm definitely a community advocate, organizer. That comes right along with pastoring in an urban context. And and that's kind of been bequeathed to me. My dad was a pastor, which I never thought I would do because he was a pastor. Most pastors' kids, which you understand this, like do everything they can to avoid going in this direction. I will say this though, I came in kicking and stomping. But I felt like this is what God wanted me to do. And the crazy thing is, it's not because I wanted to speak. Like a lot of guys and people, ladies even, like when they envision themselves doing something, they envision themselves, typically when it comes to ministry, they see themselves like speaking, right? Preaching. That's not really what I saw. As a matter of fact, I ran into this giant of a legend in our community. His name is E.E. Cleveland. He was almost otherworldly, like, right, almost he never looked people in the eye when he spoke to them, right? It was just like he was just on another level. We kind of revered this guy. And I was in a class with him because he taught at our school where we were. And I asked him, I said, how do I know if I'm called to ministry? And you would suppose like a pastor's kid would know the answer to that question, but just because you grew up in that
Mm.
house doesn't mean you know, right? So, and he said to me something that I thought was very profound. He was like, whatever consumes your thoughts the most, that's what God wants you to do. And what was
Mm.
consuming my thoughts the most was I saw myself in the community helping people. That's what my parents did. Our house was like the
Mm.
house on the side of the road. We had over 70 people that lived with us at some point, either family members, church members, people, random people off the street, the community. Even my adopted brother, in a way, is like a random person off the street in the community. My mom worked for a Section 8 housing authority, and this family came in, mother dying of AIDS, and a son looking for services. And my mom invited him over. He ended up staying for the rest of his life. You went to Oakwood with him. You worked at camp with him too. So that's kind of what I saw that's kind of what my parents modeled. We were always in the inner city. And so, after figuring that I wasn't going to be a disc jockey and that I wasn't going to be an attorney, and I got clarity from God, I was like, I want to help people. Like, I really want to help people, especially people who are marginalized, especially people that are on the fringe, on the periphery. And so that's always been my passion, pastoring. But
Mm.
interestingly, since I've been doing that, especially in a Black context in the urban communities, it is impossible to do that and not be confronted with the issue of of, of Black men, like men,
Mm.
and men particularly, their absence, their struggles, their issues. And I don't know how I got into this. All I know is that I started speaking at men's stuff, and then I started doing my doctoral research on this. And it wasn't like this is my thing. I don't know why. Honestly, as I look back on it, I don't know how this became a thing, but it was more like, you get affirmed and people are like, hey, you should speak at this men's thing. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know why. And then it was like, I need to do research. Well, I have all these men in my church for my doctoral program who are like apathetic on the fringe. Man, I would love to do research on seeing how I could bring these guys to a different level. And so all of that kind of converged around the time of the pandemic, where I
Mm.
had this strong sense that I wanted to respond to all the things that were happening. Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, everything. It was kind of like we were all sitting there watching our televisions. We all wanted to do something. And of
Mm.
course, I've been protesting and I've been involved in advocacy and all this type of stuff in the community. But I was like, man, Black men need help. Like, we are a target. There's no sympathy for us. This is, my heart of empathy kind of went out. And that's when I had a friend of mine, very similar to what you have done for me, I got a coach. I just hired a coach and was like, I need clarity on what I want to do. I want ownership of some things. There's some things I want to control and do for my own personal passion. And I'll end by saying this. This is something that somebody said to me. They said that you are perfectly equipped to help the former version of yourself.
Mm.
And when I looked at all my own personal struggles, being a pastor, being married, being addicted to pornography, not being a good father, being a workaholic, doing all those things, having some daddy issues because of my parents' divorce, I have my own sense of pain. I related to a lot of men in pain. And I was like, I know that's who I was. Maybe that's what I need to be focused on. And as a result, man, we started this men's community support, community empowerment group. And thousands of men later is kind of what I'm really passionate about right now.
I mean, I remember when you launched it with an online conference in 2020, right? And you had thousands of men that joined your community. I mean, it was one of the most incredible things I'd ever seen for somebody to come out of nowhere, because it wasn't as if you were, like you said, doing this particular work before, but you started speaking to it and it seemed to really resonate. And I became one of the coaches in the community. I can truly testify to what the impact that it had. It gave me, even as I was working with men, it gave me a deeper sense of understanding about the pain, the level of pain and hopelessness that so many men were languishing with in isolation, right? And so being able to build a community is something that I'm even more of an advocate for. But one of the things that you did, and this is long before this community ever happened, you mentioned the fact that you were addicted to pornography. And I've always wanted to ask you, what that decision was like to come out and acknowledge this publicly. What made
Yeah.
you say this? Because I think that is one of the things that has really set you apart from most leaders that I know. Because I'm also a PK. You know, I grew up with other preachers' kids, so I know somewhat some of the background. Know that a lot of these guys are struggling with things that they never acknowledge publicly. They never feel like they can be. It's like lighting your career on fire, right?
Professional suicide. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. But the opposite. Well, I'm never going to ask you about the criticism, but can you kind of talk about that decision to go public? And then I have another question around that whole topic.
That's a great question. I remember the first time I mentioned that I was pastoring a church, and yeah, I honestly, I think I was just, it was naive. It was naive.
Naivete.
It was naivety, but it was naivety. It was a genuine naivety, man. It's like I wanted personally to be free, and I knew I wanted to help other people to see that, man, you are not the only one that's struggling, right? And so honestly, if I have a fault, and my fault is I can be so sincerely genuine to the point of transparency and vulnerability where sometimes, especially at that time, I mean, I've matured so much. At that time, I don't really consider what the fallout, the implications, like what's going to happen as a result of saying this.
Right.
I do remember it was in a church service. We had communion that day, and I had gotten all this stuff right with my wife. I talked to my parents. I talked to my dad about blah, blah, blah. And I told the church, and seriously, affirmation will do some stuff for you. It will embolden you in a thing where, you don't, it's almost like God shielded me from seeing a lot of the criticism, because there was a whole lot of criticism that I didn't know about. People just don't walk up to you and say, you need to stop doing that, or I don't like that you do that, or, or whatever. But I remember in the service. So this is what I saw in the service. In the service, it was like, I mean, you're a church going guy. Like, it was just like God took over the service. Like, that's how we would say as church people. Like, people were crying, people were getting up, they were repenting. It was just stuff like that happening in a communion service, like just a normal one. And yeah. and from that day forward, it was like, almost in my mind, it was the confirmation of God saying, when you share your story, it helps people. That's the only thing I had in my mind. So going forward, I just kept doing it. I just kept doing it because I'm like, this is the right thing to do. I think over time, as people started coming to me, they were like, yo, man, I heard so-and-so saying this, I kind of feel like you need to tone that down and blah, blah, blah. So in a way, I think, and I say God because I'm a man of faith, I feel like God had me in my naivety and my sincerity to share that and get affirmation on it so that I would have the courage to keep doing it and not be discouraged. He shielded me from a lot of that. Now, I'm not stupid. I'm naive, but I was naive, but I'm not stupid. I do realize that, but I've always kind of had a courage thing with me. I've always not been scared. That's kind of my dad. My dad is really bold and kind of bodacious. He's probably more radical than I am, at least in that regard. So I kind of got that, honestly. I've always sort of been a tell it like it is kind of person. But that's just different. And especially in our context, that definitely doesn't happen. But just to really make this clear, it's like when you get affirmation on something, it says to you, it helps you to confirm what it is I think that your superpower is. And for whatever reason, I just kept, and then I started getting more mature at how I approached it in different contexts and spaces and knowing what to say, what not to say. And so now I've almost become like the transparency guy. You know what I mean? Yeah. And, I've grown in how I understand how it should be used. But one thing I do know, especially with men, and you know this, bro, you not going, you can't reach men like, and you're not you know, like to me, not being transparent and vulnerable with men is a business failure equivalent to Chick-fil-A or fast food restaurants having poor customer service. Like,
Yep.
you cannot do that with men. I just, you know, you're not going to get a lot of traction. And you know, and I know the more, hey, what's up, girl? You and I know, like, the more we, you know, anytime we do men stuff, it's like, you know, that transparency piece is the thing that kind of opens them up and they start sharing. It's the work piece. So even in our group, we just saw more and more, this is what men need. Now, I don't know about everybody else, but I know men need this. Yeah.
No, 100%, man. I think to your point about you becoming the transparent, I think that was probably the catalyst for you. It laid the groundwork for you being able to be the leader of this movement, right? That story. Honestly, because that story is so many other men's story, including mine, right? Struggled for years with it. And as we say, still struggle because you are always battling to not go back to where you were, right?
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
What I wanted to ask,
that's recovery language. That's what they say. You're always in recovery. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
But it's a behavior, not an identity. But what I wanted to ask you was, from the flip side, right? How did your wife deal with it, right? Because I mean, this is based on a conversation I had with my wife, right? And I won't go all into it, but I am curious because I know that there may be women that are watching this that are dealing with their husband struggling with something, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes the struggle is ours, but the impact spreads. It's, you know, and there's no way to contain the collateral damage, right? And so it's unintended because it's something that we have dealt with, but whether direct or indirect, there's collateral damage. How did your wife come to terms with it? What was the healing process for her and you around you dealing with your issue?
Are you talking about the struggle or me sharing or both?
Well, I'm actually more talking about the struggle itself. And then how she arrived at the point where she was comfortable with you sharing that as well, because that would have required, I would imagine, a level of healing for her to be on one accord with you in doing this. So it's not an embarrassment, right? It's she recognizes the value in you sharing that story as well. So, but what was that experience like for her?
Yeah. So in full transparency, I remember when I first shared, I don't think I cleared that with my wife. So I want to tell everybody out there, that was not the way to do that. Right. It was, again, the immaturity. I was kind of in one of those moments where I felt like the Holy Spirit was leading me. Right. But when you are transparent and you're vulnerable, and which I think there are two different things. Transparency is like seeing through. It is more or less telling specific things about your life. Vulnerability is just having a humility about you that, hey, I don't have life figured out. I'm struggling. And you can do that without telling people. But I didn't do it the right way. I kind of just in my immaturity, you know, and trying to figure out how to share my story. I didn't do that. My wife never said anything to me about it. My wife never was like, I wish you wouldn't have done that. I had to go to my wife prior to that and just kind of confess to her that, hey, man, I got this struggle. So I think me doing that was more important to her than what she felt people may think of her as being married to a man who had that struggle. Like, that never was her thing. My wife is she's just different. She doesn't really care so much about the public. My wife is the type of person who never really embraced, I'm a pastor's wife. She's like, I'm MyRon's wife, if that makes sense. So she's quite grounded in that regard. So that was never her thing. And she's often very supportive and encouraging. And mainly because I think she came to understand, so there's twofold. I think she came to understand that part of my healing was in sharing, right? That helped me to be less likely to do it the more I talked about it, right? So I think she understood that. Then there was another tension where, from some of her own pain and trauma, it scared her that was my struggle. Because I think also felt a sense of insecurity as to what this would mean for our marriage and our relationship, right? I give my wife credit. My wife, she listened to me, meaning as I would teach on these things and as I got more adept in understanding how the addiction works and all that stuff, I think she was listening and taking note and getting exposed to how this works. And so she got more secure, but she also did her own research as well. And so she was really good at separating, okay, this is just because the dude is into porn doesn't mean he's going to cheat on me. Doesn't mean that he doesn't love me or is not attracted to me. Right? She started to understand men. The other good thing is she has a father, she has brothers. So, you know what I'm saying? That I think that was helpful to her and how she handled it. I mean, in so many words, bro, I lucked up, man, like in terms of like the safety net that my wife provided. She's always been very supportive. And I remember in the past, I messed up several times. And I didn't go to my wife every time I messed up. That's a whole nother conversation. I don't recommend that guys do that. But we have had an open, vulnerable conversation throughout our marriage about our struggles, not just mine. And so that has helped to deal with it. But no, it wasn't always easy, man. Honestly, there were times I know my wife was like, "What does this mean? You know, like what does, you know?" And so she was curious. And let me say this to sisters and to ladies, I think you need to start with curiosity and not start with fear, right? And it's okay to be afraid, but be curious. It's the curiosity of asking questions and trying to get understanding. It's the same thing that you would want from your spouse if he did not understand your mental health issue. I know I talk to brothers all the time who are married to a spouse that battles with anxiety and depression. And sometimes your natural instinct is to you know, be in judgment or be frustrated or be in fear. But whatever the struggle is, you should always lean with curiosity first and empathy. Like empathy, curiosity, it's the starting point because she began to realize that this is just a struggle. It's not, and it's no different from any other struggle that somebody may have, you know. So
Right.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate you sharing that. That's really insightful because I think a lot of times we see public figures go through things and we forget that if they are married or well, even if they're not, but there's a family, there's other people that are impacted behind the scenes that have to deal with that. There are children, right? There are parents. And so I think that partly, and this kind of helps us to segue to the upcoming conference, but it kind of helps us to understand why there's a stigma that men have about holding things in. And the things that we're struggling with, we keep to ourselves because I don't know if we almost feel like we're protecting others. I think that can be an excuse, right? But we're definitely not doing everything we can to deal with the thing. And so we're just kind of managing our issue internally.
Yeah.
It's almost like crisis management internally. Like, I don't want this to blow out, right? But inevitably it does. And so can you talk about the work that you've been doing as you've seen men start to allow and enter into make investment in the space of healing themselves, of handling their issues, and some of the results that you start to see as a result of men taking these steps?
Yeah, I mean, it's been incredible, bro. I think again, so I want to say for people that are watching, because I love the way this conversation is going. I have matured, grown, and developed from the pastor to the guy who's passionate about men to the guy who's learning how to share his story, right? Because no, you don't get it right. You know, it's not perfect, and you always increase in wisdom on how to do that so that you are effective. At the end of the day, I just want to be effective in helping men, right? Specifically on this subject and people in general, but especially families. I'm passionate about families, but I'm passionate about men because of their role in the family and their neglect, right? We know that they're neglected. We know that there are no safe spaces for men. We know that society has socialized men to essentially not be human, right? And not have permission to be human, not to explore emotions, not to feel pain, not to get help, right? And so what happens is most men are lonely, as all the statistics say in the United States, and they're dying because they're lonely.
Right.
There's too much research out there now that's saying it's not just diet and lack of exercise that's killing men, but it's suppressed and repressed stress, pain, trauma, and that men essentially, this is crazy, are dying trying to be men, trying to fit
Mm.
the caricature of manhood that our society has created is killing men. So to answer your question, as I'm starting to see how this approach, and you and I are very much aligned on the approach, our
Mm.
approach is not a responsibility approach, right? You need
Mm.
to be more responsible, which is typically the message that, it's the discipline mindset, it's the military mindset, it's the sports mindset of coaching. It's the discipline, be better, do better, and
Mhm.
so forth. Well, what we have discovered is that that's not helping, that's not working. But what I have seen is working, and this is from experience, and research supports this, but you and I have seen this with our own eyes, that when you approach men from a place of humility, from the perspective of that you have shared pain and shared struggles, it's
Uh-huh.
literally like dudes are looking for this. And honestly, that's what happened a few years ago during the pandemic when thousands of men, what that told me was, and it confirmed for you as well, was like, yo, dudes are looking for this.
Mhm.
They've been waiting for this. They've been waiting for safety. They've been waiting for a place where they can cry, where they can say, I'm struggling, where they can say, I'm failing, where they can say, I don't know what I'm doing, where they can literally say, I'm scared. How many men have some like space or relationship where they can be in, where they can actually say that? You know what I'm saying? So just
Yeah.
seeing men's lives change as a result of creating these spaces and these environments has just been constant confirmation and affirmation that this is the move. Like, this is the hunger and the desire that men have. And the more we keep feeding it, and you know this, men, the more they keep wanting it. And that's one of the reasons why we're having this conference. That our conference is different. You're not going to come to this conference and be told more of what you need to be doing. Because
You know,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and I've just thought about this, but I think one of the other things that, especially in today's climate, and this is not obviously. And here's the weird thing: it we've reached a climate where it almost feels like if you are affirming men, you're disparaging women by the opposite, right?
That's right. That's right.
And that is not at all. I think that one of the things I really wanted to convey over and over again is that because men and women are aligned, all right, this is not, I think the male female dynamic is unique amongst all of the other things that people have issues around, because men and women form families, right? That dynamic, um, for traditional marriage is paramount. You have to understand who you are as a man, and a woman has to understand who she is as a woman. But we also need to understand each other and our roles in supporting one another. And if you have two sides of the story and both sides are broken, you cannot have a whole marriage,
You can't.
which means that
Right.
your family is fractured. The foundation of your family is fractured, which means the foundation of communities is fractured, which means the foundation of nations is fractured, because societies and cultures are made up of families and people and individuals. So I was saying that just to say that the other challenge that men have, by and large, I know you got to go, but
Yeah.
one of the other challenges that we have is that there is not a space for men to be able to celebrate their wins. Because if you can never, so in a way, you have to dwell on your negativity. You have to hold in everything, even the things that should allow you to push you and be better, right? You can't say that, hey, I just did a great thing today. I'm winning at life. I'm struggling in this area. Like, so there's two sides of it. And so having that, all being able to be in a place where people can go, for men can be able to go and to be a whole man and continue to elevate himself for the sake of himself, but also for the sake of his wife, for his children, for his community, for his church, place of faith, whatever the case may be. Um, Well, I know we're abbreviated today, but tell people about the conference, what's coming up, where they need to go to get that information.
Sure. No, it's a great point. Men not only need understanding and safety, they need affirmation. Like that's powerful. We could do a whole podcast just on that. But I have to say this real quick because I've got to run and take care of my father, who's got some appointments. But the conference is what you've been looking for, bro. Go to the website, mensbreakthroughconference.com. Mensbreakthroughconference.com. We're going to be in Atlanta, Georgia, right there where Fred is, May 5 and 6. And all you need to do is go to the website, register. Registration closes next week, the 21st. I believe that's Friday. So there is nothing about this conference that is not going to provide for you the things that we talked about. You're going to leave encouraged. You're going to leave with community. But more importantly, you're going to leave with a breakthrough. And that's the goal. You know, whatever it is that's limiting you, holding you back, sabotaging on, addicted to. Yeah, man, come through and be a part of a bunch of men who all want the same thing, right? That's championship DNA stuff right there. Like, so yeah, mensbreakthroughconference.com and registration ends on the 21st. So you want to move quickly. All right, bro.
Bro, I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for everybody watching. The link is in the comments below. And we'll see you at the Men's Breakthrough Conference in Atlanta as well. Shouts out to MyRon. Thanks for those of you who stopped by for a second, for a minute, as always. My name is Frederick Douglass Bussey. This has been another edition of Power Lunch Podcast. As always, ever forward.